Thanks, Laura. You've given us lots to think about for the discussion period, that's for sure. Our next speaker might have a slightly different angle on things, but that's the benefit of having such a diverse range of expertise and backgrounds on the panel. The next speaker is Dr. Aeyal Gross, who's well known in Israeli academic and civil society circles, who's a professor of law at Tel Aviv University. He was educated in Harvard. He's taught in Columbia, University of Toronto, University of London, and also at Harvard University. So he's been around in some pretty rare circles teaching this stuff. He's got extensive practical experience as well, which I think is particularly fascinating. He was, for example, a member of the board of the Association for Civil Rights in Israel, ACRI, who many of you will know. He was also on the advisory board of Human Rights Watch. He's published widely, many books and articles, as well as newspaper and other publications within Israel. Without further ado, Aeyal.
1, 2, 3. Yeah, now working? Okay, great. Thank you for this kind introduction and for inviting me. I have to say I was a bit hesitant about this talk, about this invitation, for a few reasons. And part of them is because there's something in the nature of this discussion that I find very problematic always. And it's not a critique of any specific person. It's maybe a critique of the discipline. And one of it is that we tend in the discussion of international humanitarian law to usually abstract from the big picture. We tend to discuss by very abstract principles like proportionality that can be interpreted in very different ways by very different people and don't have any clear measures. So it can really be like sometimes a very difficult discourse to create. We tend to conduct this discussion when there are disputes about the facts. And some people would argue they have access to facts. Some people would argue those are their facts. Other people would argue those are their facts. Unfortunately, to my regret, this conference doesn't include, I'm a board member of ACRI, but it doesn't include any of the, but I'm mostly here as a law professor. It doesn't include any people from the civil society organizations, which do research, actually, facts, which is something I don't personally do, and I regret that. Although, in the previous panel, I heard that some human rights groups are terrorist organizations. I was pretty shocked to hear this, I have to say. Well, that was said. I don't know I never know what people mean. I know what they say and what they do. What they mean, in Hebrew, we say dvarim shebalev einam dvarim. What's in the heart is not, Only God can read what we mean. We can only understand what people say and what they do. And that's it. I will use this actually. Thank you for saying that, because I'll use this point about that we only can address what people do and what they say and not what they mean later. Yeah, I was pretty shocked. Actually, I have to say I left the room for a few moments to overcome my shock that such a thing would be said in this place. And I was sure that other people didn't protest it maybe. But it was said here. It was said from this stage. But anyway, but this was, okay, sorry, so I go back. So I think, as I said, the discussion often abstract from the bigger picture in IHL. It often deals with very abstract concepts that we can argue about. We have lack information about facts. Facts are contested. And as the lawyers will know, we have a very important separation between what we call jus ad bellum, the law about the legality of the war, and jus in bello, the law about how we behave in war, which is very important, but also has a lot of prices, which has to do with abstract dimension, which often takes us from the bigger context. So we end up discussing whether in this building what was done was legal or not legal, but we abstract from the bigger question of occupation, siege, dispossession that has been going on for almost 50 years in different forms. And that's a price that this discussion, and that's why I have to say that in my research, I will be very frank with you. In my research, academic writing on humanitarian law, I usually try to write on law of occupation and not on the law of conduct hostilities per se, because I think those prices are often to be paid. And I think you lose something. You gain, of course, there are a lot of things you gain from the way the discussion is constructed, but you also pay a lot of prices. And I think we have to put them on the table. So at the same time, and I think maybe we should try and think about those things a bit differently, but also think about what happens when we think within the existing framework. So can we look at the small picture and the big picture together? Do we miss something if we just separate incidents and just look at small pictures? And for me, looking at And of course, also the title is more general. It's clear, and that the recent hostilities this summer very much were featured here in the background and were just discussed in the previous panels. For me, sometimes I think that with all my criticism of the current discourse of international humanitarian law and the problems and the way that I know that you can make the argument both ways, and I often tell my students, look, if you ask me that if rockets are being shot from a specific place, and you know that at that moment rockets which may hurt Israeli civilians are being shot, and there are civilians, Palestinian civilians there who may be killed, is it legal to bomb this, or is it not legal to bomb it, knowing you will kill quite a few civilians? And I'm specifically talking about the example that rockets are being shot. I would say I think any answer is in a way horrible. Any answer is in a way almost insane. That's the legal framework we're working with. But that's, any answer would be horrible. And I think maybe none of you will disagree that any answer will be in a way horrible because it will deal with the loss of civilian life. But I think that when I look at both some of the small pictures and the big picture of the recent hostilities, I sometimes say yes. But if I wanted to teach my students what is textbook lack of proportionality or lack of precautionary measures, I could use this case maybe. So let's, for example, take one, start with small. Let's talk about one case, for example. And of course, you can always now, you don't know all the facts. I can never know all the facts, but I can try to address the facts that were made public. So for example, shelling of a cafe during the recent hostilities in Gaza, which killed 9 civilians. So testimony that was given to B'Tselem by Bilal Walid al-Atsal, who's telling this following story. Yesterday, Wednesday, 9th of July, after I ate the meal that breaks the Ramadan fast and prayed in the Ramadan prayer, I went to the Waqt al-Makh cafe. I'm sorry, I can't pronounce the name well, but in English it means Fun Time Beach, towards the Soccer World Cup semifinal between Holland and Argentina. This was the World Cup semifinal. The cafe is owned by the Sawali family. It's constructed of palm fronds. It's on the Khan Yunis beach, about 30 meters from the water, 200 meters from the first line of houses. There were about 13 people at the cafe, all men. We knew that Israeli airplanes were bombing several places in Gaza Strip at the time, but we saw that the cafe was safe. We watched the first half of the match together. We drank tea and coffee, and there was a relaxed mood. We didn't hear any airplanes nearby. Suddenly, there was a loud explosion. By the time I realized what was happening, I found myself buried under a pile of sand and dirt. I choked on the sand and could hardly breathe. I managed to get my head out of the sand. The rest of my body was stuck, and I started calling for help. It was dark, but I could see that most of the cafe had been destroyed. It just simply disappeared, replaced by a huge hole in the ground. The people who had been inside were buried under the sand. A few minutes later, the neighbor and ambulance teams reached the site and tried to get the injured people out. People dug around my body and pulled me out of the sand. I was taken to hospital by ambulance. My legs were severely injured. My whole body is bruised. The doctor examined me, etc., etc. People who visited me in the hospital told me 9 people were killed in the bombing. 3 of them were my relatives. 2 other relatives were injured, one of them an 11-year-old boy. I'm still in the hospital. Now, later, what I managed to get, and also because I write legal commentary for Haaretz, I also asked the editors what did the army explain, and they said that only thing I managed to get was that they said there was a Hamas or jihad, I'm not sure, operative in the cafe that they wanted to target. Now, if I wanted to tell my students what could be a textbook case of lack of proportionality, I would say targeting a cafe at a busy time when people are watching the World Cup, when you are supposed to expect that civilians will be killed, because you want to kill one Hamas person who is there, unless you will tell me that killing him will stop rockets in Israel for the next 5 years maybe, or 10 years maybe, I'm not sure, is probably textbook lack of proportionality. So that's why I kind of in a way say, all my criticism of this discourse, if we're going to say now, maybe it's not, I would say to my colleagues, let's just go away and say, let's quit and say we don't need law of proportionality. Let's reject it. We can say it's not just numbers, as you say, but if we cannot say that bombing a cafe was civilians for killing one Hamas person, assuming there was such a person there, at a busy time where you should expect reasonably, I would guess, that, that there would be a lot of civilians watching the World Cup. If we can say that that's textbook lack of proportionality, what do we have the law of proportionality for? What do we have international law for? So we can sit comfortably and have nice conferences and talk while people are being killed like that. Other issue that we can talk is about the destruction of civilian homes. And we heard now, we had a lot of incidents. I can't go into the incidents, they're all reported, but we have a lot of reports of huge numbers of children, for example, the Kawara family, 6 children aged 8 to 13, and many examples. Actually, I couldn't show it because there's some problem with the website, but B'Tselem has a nice presentation with different houses and how many Children were killed in all of them, but maybe they are terrorist organizations, so we should ignore it. Now, it was reported by I don't know, the legal, the military commentator of the newspaper I write for. Maybe it's a terrorist newspaper, but that the IDF was not only striking buildings used to store rockets and as launching pod, but also the houses of families of Hamas commanders. Now we can say, yes, each of the houses became a military target because it became like command center. Well, given the number of houses that were destroyed, I don't find this very convincing, but of course I don't have all the facts. But I would say that even if there were military targets, because each single house that was destroyed became a military target because it became, first of all, I would very be dubious about this designation as military targets of the civilian houses. What would it require? Does holding one meeting there or two meetings make it a military target? What are the army standards to say they're military targets? That was never detailed. And what is a proof, etc. But beyond that, again, we can go to proportionality and also precautionary measures. And we know about the warning issues, but I don't want to go into this. I think that with the warning, I don't want to go in detail, but I would just say, and if you want to read, Janina Deal wrote a very good article in the blog Opinion Jurist about how warnings do not make an illegitimate target legitimate, right? They do not make a civilian target a military one. And also, we also know that effectively a lot of time people don't have to go, don't have time to go, don't have where to go because the whole area is being bombed. And besides, if the purpose is to target a Hamas person that is there, right, which is under the targeted killing doctrine supposedly legal, what is the meaning of the warning? So there's also a paradox here. So the purpose is a purpose to destroy the house and maybe to kill the civilians because a Hamas person, maybe he has the best capacity to live, or maybe he's already not there, right? Can we use just one clip? Yeah. You could just do this for full screen. So there are two other videos from Mr. Jaya, but I won't show them for lack of time. You can all find them on the internet. Now, more interesting. I agree. I totally agree with you. Sometimes I think maybe I should change the profession. So during the hostilities in Gaza last summer, about 2,000 people were killed. Of course, we can argue about the number. According to some statistics, about half of them were non-involved civilians and about a quarter children. Now, we can look at of course, now, by the way, everything that was said by the Judge Advocate General about how shooting rockets at civilians is illegal and a war crime is clear and obvious. I don't think I have to repeat it here. And I think, of course, we cannot ignore the threat and the damage, especially to the residents of South Israel, caused by the long-term rockets. But if we look at, and of course numbers, as you say, is not the only story, but if we look at even the bigger picture, and I know already what kind of criticism we can get for doing it, but if we look at both the bigger picture and smaller picture, and we try to understand the threats of the rockets, and also the number of casualties from the rockets until the beginning of the recent round of hostilities, and we ask, is such destruction, both at the use ad bellum level, which I already know what Pina will say, I think, but and the use in bello level, again, should we just say, let's be honest and say we don't believe in proportionality, precautionary measures, and probably also not in distinction, because if we don't have them for that, what do we have them for? And as the esteemed human rights lawyer, Michael Sfard called it a targeted assassination of international law, both in the definition of what constitutes a legitimate target for attack, which, as he says, now includes not only classic military targets, but also facilities and objects whose connection to the enemy organization is non-military in nature, like symbols of Hamas government, offices, policemen, the parliament building, etc. But more so, when the doctrine that goes back to the Dafya doctrine, Lebanon, Second Lebanon War, that when fighting in urban areas, we're entitled to treat the entire area as a legitimate target and bombard it via airstrikes, as we've seen, or artillery shelling, as I can show you videos from Shajaya, as long as we have first warned all the residents of our intention to do so and give them time to live. And so this, we have seen that during the recent hostilities in Gaza, but also before. I think we've seen it actually getting worse from Second Lebanon War every time. So first, each round of Gaza, it's worse. And what's really shocking is that we get to use for worse, right? We just get used to it. And so it's like a gradual process, kind of like a horrible slippery slope. And we have, and I don't want to show you the other videos, partly because, maybe we should, but they really have the pictures of piles of bodies of women, children, and men who are being killed and bombed again and again. Now, is everything justified because we are threatened, because our rockets? The IDF lawyers who provide legal support for this combat doctrine argued further conducting a targeted assassination of international law, both as a distinction, proportionality, and the duty to take precautionary measures levels. My colleague Nina Shervit Baruch wrote that in the Gaza Strip, Hamas and other terrorist organizations use civilian buildings, including apartment blocks, school, mosque, hospital, and the like, as launchpad for attacks, weapon storage, and other military purposes. And that this means that those objects lose their immunity. Now, again, it's very hard to contrast such a sweeping this declaration until you start looking at stories like the one of the cafe, like the one of whole families killed in their homes, and you wondered, are we really convinced that each of those, can we just say sweepingly, and can we be convinced just because the army said so that each of those was a legitimate military target? And if so, were precautionary measures taken? And if so, was the attack proportional? Now, Pnina said that statement made by military and political officials about exacting a steep toll for the population or calls to flatten Gaza serve as proof of Israel's alleged intention to harm civilians, even when those uttering the statements have no connection or influence on the IDF commands, and in no way reflects the contents of those commands and the directives given in practice. And therefore, statements should not be made. But I want to go back to Second Lebanon War and the rounds in Gaza. Our political leaders did say that we will act in an out-proportional way. I've seen interviews with Air Force pilots being asked, I can't remember if it was Second Lebanon War or Gaza War, do you think what you're doing is proportional? This was on Israeli TV. And they said, do you think that what the British did in Dresden was proportional? Now, beyond this totally irrelevant comparison for so many reasons, this shows how this discourse also goes to the rank and file. When we have pilots, that's the answer. Or when the former head of the Israeli Air Force said about the Shrader case that he only felt makakala bekanaf, a small crack of the, small shaking of the plane. But I will end with this case, because when the Shrader case happened, what year was it? 2003, when Israel assassinated or tried to assassinate, did actually kill him? I can't remember if they killed him, right? Hamas, he was killed, Hamas leader Shrader in Gaza, and 13 civilians were, 14 civilians were killed, including a few children. Everybody was shocked. This was considered a very big issue. There was a committee that did investigation about it. I have a lot of problem with the committee conclusion, but that's another story. We can talk about it too. It was considered a shocking thing. And when the chief of staff, later chief of staff, head of the Air Force said it was only a small, when they asked him, what does a pilot feel when he drops this bomb? And he said, only the plane shaking a bit. Everybody was shocked about it. But now, every day is like the Shrader case, and nobody is shocked. Thank you so much.